the hidden way negative news rewires your brain for exhaustion. It's 2:30 in the afternoon. Your brain feels strangely exhausted. Not physically tired, just mentally drained. The strange part? Your day hasn't even been that demanding. Then your phone buzzes. A news alert. You tap it, just for a second. One headline becomes another, then another. 20 minutes later, you look up and something feels different. Your shoulders are tight. Your mind is racing. And the focus you had a moment ago is gone. Now here's the unsettling question. What if the thing draining your mental energy today wasn't work at all? What if it was the news? Because modern neuroscience suggests that negative news doesn't just inform your brain, it activates it like a threat signal. And when that happens repeatedly throughout the day, your nervous system quietly begins behaving as if the world around you is constantly on fire. Today, we're exploring the hidden biology behind something millions of people experience but rarely understand. Why reading the news can leave your brain feeling completely exhausted. You're listening to Your Space Today, the podcast where we decode fatigue, stress, and burnout so you can rise again. Every Tuesday, we explore the hidden connections between your habits, your health, and your happiness, giving you the tools to take back your energy and your life. Most people assume the problem with news is time. They think the issue is simply spending too many minutes scrolling. But the real issue is not the time. It's what the news does to your nervous system. To understand why the news can be so draining, we need to look at a small structure deep inside the brain called the amygdala. Think of the amygdala as your brain's security guard. Its job is simple: scan the environment, detect threats, trigger the alarm if something looks dangerous. When the amygdala senses danger, your body reacts instantly. Your heart rate increases, your muscles tense, your attention narrows. This system evolved to keep our ancestors alive. If a predator appeared in the bushes, hesitation could be fatal. So the brain became extremely good at detecting danger signals. But here's the problem. Your brain's threat detection system cannot reliably distinguish between a physical threat in front of you and a threatening headline on a screen. A story about violence in another city can activate many of the same neural pathways as a real danger nearby. Your brain doesn't fully understand that the threat is distant and abstract. It only understands the signal. This connects to something psychologists call negativity bias. Human brains naturally pay more attention to negative information than positive information. Not because we are pessimistic, because survival depended on noticing danger quickly. Missing good news had little cost. Missing danger could be fatal. So the brain prioritizes negative signals. And modern news environments are full of exactly those signals: conflict, disaster, urgent alerts, crisis. Each headline taps into the same biological lever: attention through threat detection. Which means something interesting happens when you read a stream of negative news. Your brain keeps activating the same stress system again and again. And that system uses a lot of energy. Later in this episode, we'll look at a fascinating experiment showing that just 14 minutes of negative news can change how people evaluate their own personal problems. But first, we need to understand something even more surprising about how news affects the nervous system. A study from the University of Montreal examined how people respond physiologically after reading negative news stories. Researchers expected cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, to spike immediately. But that's not exactly what happened. In many participants, cortisol didn't rise right away. Instead, something more subtle occurred. Their nervous systems became more reactive to future stress. Later challenges triggered stronger responses than usual. A frustrating email, a disagreement, a moment of uncertainty. All of these produced bigger stress reactions. It was as if the news had turned the nervous system into a hair trigger. This means negative news may not always feel intensely stressful in the moment, but it lowers the threshold at which everyday challenges start feeling overwhelming. Another large study looked at something researchers call problematic news consumption. This describes a pattern where people feel compelled to constantly check news updates throughout the day. The researchers found that about 16.5% of adults fall into this category. Roughly 1 in 6 people. And these individuals reported significantly higher levels of anxiety, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, and even physical symptoms such as headaches and digestive problems. But the most fascinating finding may come from studies examining media exposure after traumatic events. Researchers discovered a self-reinforcing loop. People distressed by news coverage tended to seek more news, and the more they consumed, the more distressed they became. The brain is searching for resolution. It wants to understand the threat. But modern news feeds rarely provide closure. There is always another story, another alert, another crisis. So the brain continues searching for answers that never quite arrive. This creates the behavior many people recognize as doom scrolling through alarming news even when it makes us feel worse. In a few minutes, we'll see why this cycle doesn't just affect your emotions. It can also ripple through multiple systems that regulate your daily energy. But this leads to a deeper question. If negative news repeatedly activates our threat system, what happens when we expose ourselves to that environment every single day? The answer reveals something psychologists call mean world syndrome. And it can quietly reshape how we perceive reality. Communication researcher George Gerbner coined the term mean world syndrome. After decades studying media exposure, he noticed a pattern. People who consume large amounts of news begin to overestimate danger in the world. They believe crime is more common than it is. They perceive society as more hostile. The world starts to feel more threatening than statistics actually support. This happens because news is not a representative sample of reality. News focuses on exceptions, the dramatic, the dangerous, the unusual. But when we see these stories repeatedly, the brain begins treating them as normal patterns. And that shift in perception changes how we experience daily life. In fact, a classic experiment found that after watching just 14 minutes of negative news, participants rated their personal worries as more severe and less solvable. Nothing in their lives had changed, but their interpretation of their lives had changed. Now, here's where the impact becomes even more interesting. Because the stress response triggered by negative news doesn't stay in one part of your life, it spreads through 4 systems that regulate human energy: your fuel, your movement, your mind, and your rhythm. Let's look briefly at what happens in each of these. First, fuel. Stress hormones like cortisol can increase cravings for high-calorie foods and destabilize blood sugar. Many people notice that after consuming stressful news, they reach for snacks or sugar, not out of hunger, but as a way to soothe the nervous system. Second, movement. The threat response produces muscle tension, tight shoulders, clenched jaw, shallow breathing. But because news consumption usually happens while sitting still, that tension never releases through physical movement. Over time, it accumulates as fatigue and discomfort. Third, mind. When the brain stays in threat detection mode, attention becomes biased toward danger. Neutral situations start feeling more negative. People may interpret uncertainty as risk. Cynicism and anxiety can slowly increase. And finally, rhythm. News alerts fragment attention throughout the day. Research shows it can take around 23 minutes to regain full focus after an interruption. Evening news consumption can also suppress melatonin production, delaying sleep and disrupting recovery. So something that looks like a simple information habit can quietly reshape the architecture of your daily energy. So the real question becomes this. If the brain reacts to negative news like an ongoing threat signal, how can we stay informed without exhausting our nervous system? Fortunately, the research offers a few surprisingly simple solutions. The goal is not to avoid the news completely. The goal is to interact with it intentionally. One powerful change involves creating news windows. Instead of allowing alerts to interrupt the entire day, designate specific times to check the news. For many people, 2 short windows work well, one in the morning, one in the early evening. Outside those windows, ask 3 simple questions before opening a story. Does this affect a decision I need to make today? Can I take meaningful action based on this information? Does this need my attention right now? If the answer to all 3 is no, it can wait. Another helpful shift involves the type of news you consume. Researchers studying something called solutions journalism found that stories including responses and solutions produce a very different psychological effect. They still inform the audience about serious issues, but they also activate something important in the brain, a sense of agency. Instead of helplessness, finally, if you ever notice yourself sliding into a doom-scrolling spiral, try a simple 60-second reset. Put the phone down, then slowly name 3 things you can see, 2 things you can hear, 1 thing you can touch. This grounding exercise signals to your nervous system that the threat is not physically present, and that simple signal can interrupt the stress loop. If you've ever finished reading the news and felt strangely exhausted, now you understand why. Your brain wasn't being distracted. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect you. The problem is, it's responding to a world that no longer exists. A world where every signal feels immediate, every threat feels personal, and every headline feels like something you need to act on. But once you see that pattern, something shifts. Because you realize you don't need to eliminate the news, you just need to change the way your brain experiences it. And that changes everything. But here's where this becomes even more important. Because the effects of this constant low-level stress don't end when you put your phone down. They follow you into something most people never question: your sleep. And this is where things get surprising. Because a lot of people believe their problem is simple. They're tired because they didn't sleep enough. But what if that's not true? What if the real issue isn't how long you sleep, but how your body transitions out of sleep the next morning? In the next episode, we're going to explore something incredibly common and deeply misunderstood: why you can get a full 8 hours of sleep and still wake up feeling like you've been hit by a truck. Heavy body, foggy mind, no energy before the day even begins. And the explanation has nothing to do with motivation, or discipline, or trying harder. It has to do with a hidden biological problem your body is trying to solve every single morning: the transition from sleep to wakefulness. Once you understand that, you stop blaming yourself, and you start working with your biology instead of against it. Until then, be a little more intentional with what you let into your mind, because what you consume doesn't just shape your thoughts, it shapes your energy. If you found value in today's episode, I'd really appreciate it if you'd share it with friends or family who might be struggling with similar issues. Sometimes understanding that we're not alone in this struggle and that there are real, science-based explanations for what we're experiencing, that knowledge alone can be incredibly empowering. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. Take care of yourself. You deserve it. Your Space Today is published every Tuesday at 6 p.m. For detailed information, disclaimers, scientific references, visit the links below this podcast. This podcast is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult with your healthcare provider regarding any health concerns.